Good morning. Today is the morning of September 19th. It is fall here in the Western Hemisphere, and we are enjoying good fall weather and vibes, right, Pastor Eugene?
Northern?
Are we not the Western Hemisphere? Are we Northern Hemisphere? Northwestern? Yeah, Northwestern Hemisphere. And we are starting off this new, I guess, season, you could say, of the Dear Church podcast with this hot episode. It's going to be great. Today, we're going to be talking about the year of Jubilee and how that relates to us today. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
And I am Samuel, the prophet, raised from the dead through a seance that Sam just did.
No, that was the witch. That was the witch.
Endor, yeah.
Endor, yeah. Weird guy. Yeah, that witch was. Anyway, we have with us Pastor Eugene. Good to have you with us today, this morning.
It's good to be back. I thought you'd say something else other than good morning because we're back.
Like good afternoon or?
No, like good, we're back.
Oh yeah, I mean we are back. We're back. Speaking of fall, what is your favorite fall drink?
Pumpkin spice latte.
It's really not though. I know for sure it's not. I've actually
Why?
had it once. It's quite delicious.
Yeah. Pumpkin spice latte is not a latte, right? It's just pumpkin spices in milk.
To be honest, I don't
Is
know
there
what a
coffee in
latte
there?
is.
I mean, it has to have some coffee and it has to have milk, heated milk with a very small amount of froth.
Froth. Speaking of froth, I was in Italy recently during our break, and I learned the art of the espresso.
It's really good there, right?
It is, yeah.
And you went to my favorite place, St. Eustachio's.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Delicious. Delicious there. Yeah. What is your favorite country? Pastor Eugene, how was your break? I think it was like a month, I believe.
Yeah.
Was it good?
It was great.
Yeah, my break was good as well. But today, first episode, right off the bat, a lot of things have happened in the past 4 weeks or so. And, obviously we can't discuss them all, but today we will be talking about the year of Jubilee and the forgiveness of debts. And I'm sure some of you that are listening may know where we are going with this, but we want to go with the principle and then the specifics behind that principle. And we're going to try to apply it to today. So the year of Jubilee, and perhaps not all of our listeners may be familiar with the year of Jubilee, but we find the year of Jubilee that God institutes in Leviticus chapter 25. It is kind of long. Did you want me to read all of it?
No.
No.
Yeah, just read the Jubilee part. And then we could do the other parts as reference.
We'll be reading Leviticus chapter 25, verse 8 to 12. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you shall sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes from the undressed vines. For it is a jubilee, it shall be holy to you. You may eat the produce of the field. So this is the year of Jubilee. And I guess the big question is, what does this have to do with today? But I guess before we get there, Pastor Eugene, could you just kind of tell us a little bit more about what this is? What was the purpose of it? Why does God institute it? It seems like this big like a reset. So why does God do this? It seems kind of random.
Yeah, this is the place in the Bible to, in reference to the year of Jubilee. And a lot of people have been referencing it as of late because of what they've seen on the news and things like that. But The year of Jubilee is maybe one of the most exciting things that you might have read if you were someone in debt,
Yeah.
someone that came upon hard times. And it's great that we go over these verses. But we know that there was no other country at the time, or since then, I suppose, that followed these principles, these laws that we see here. It's not mentioned in any other place. I think there is one section in the Bible where it does mention Jubilee. Mm, can I find it?
Yes.
Should I find it? That's the question. Should I find it?
Mayhaps.
Okay. So Numbers 36:4.
Numbers 36:4 reads, "And when the Jubilee of the people of Israel comes, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry, and their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers."
Yeah, it's talking. The year of Jubilee has, is related to this releasing of debts, and while they don't mention the word Jubilee, there are also, inferences that you can gain that people used the similar, like they use similar kind of language, like this in other passages, even passages that our Lord Jesus quoted from
Uh-huh.
in Isaiah 61:1.
Isaiah 61:1 reads, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound."
Yeah, and so this idea of celebration comes into our culture, our language. Why do we celebrate? We celebrate because of, this releasing of debt. What was once bound has now become free. And the word for Jubilee actually comes from blowing the ram's horn. It literally means blowing the ram's horn. So you could translate Jubilee as the ram's horn or shofar, and
Oh, I
they're
love
kind of
shofar.
interchangeable, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So we see that so it's supposed to, it starts out by saying the year of Jubilee is very exciting. It's so exciting that you should sound the trumpet on the Day of Atonement on that 50th year all throughout the land. And so, yeah, what does Jubilee mean then? What does the 50th year do?
There's a redeeming of sorts.
Well, we'll go to verse 10. I think verse 10 is the crux of this section. It's so awesome that people loved it that they put it on. Can you guess?
They're
They put it on the Liberty Bell, which was just a
oh,
bell, right? In Independence Hall. It's now in Independence Hall where most recently our president gave a very famous speech with the red lights.
the stormtroopers. Yeah.
Yeah. In that hall houses the Liberty Bell, and the Liberty Bell quotes verse 10
Mm.
and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It was when we were freeing the slaves, this is why the Liberty Bell has this inscription on it. And that'll be there for, all of history for us to remember. And so this is where it starts from. And then it goes into, well, first of all, the Sabbath year is a wonderful time because Sabbath year, you rested, you kept the land fallow. What you would do is, you would make sure that the land can, like you said, reset. But what it also did was God would give provisions. And if you read the Bible, it'll continue to say this. God will give provisions for more than that year. So in the 6th year, he would say, I'm going to give you provisions or produce that year that'll last 3 years. So that your 7th year, you won't go hungry just
Yeah.
because you don't farm
Right.
or harvest or do any kind of agriculture, because that's how people lived. And then the 8th year, you'll still have food as you're planting. And God says up until the 9th year,
Because
you'll
that's
have
when
some.
they'll reap the harvest.
Yeah, and then they'll start,
Yeah.
eating the new harvest then. And so God is promising them as they continue to follow the Sabbath and the ordinances that come along with the Sabbath that he is going to be the one blessing them. So this is ordered by God. Now we know, agriculturally speaking, with all our technology, oh, this is good practice to leave the land fallow for a year so it can kind of reset to get its nutrients back and things of that sort. But even when people didn't know, God knew the order. And God was telling his people, this is what I have ordained, this is what I have ordered. So that's one great thing about the Sabbath that people would have noticed and known and would have understood. And then here comes this year of Jubilee. And in this year of Jubilee, now you're not supposed to do anything on the land, which is, what you might be used to, but it continues to go on in verse 13 that each of you shall return to his property. And so there is this returning of property that happens. So let's say in a few years, let's say you had land allotted to you.
Oh,
The Yang family has this land
the
allotted to
estate.
them, right? First of all, who allotted you this land?
God.
That's absolutely right. God is the one that has allotted the property and all the land to all of Israel. And he
Right.
says so himself in the word. And so as he has done this, he is saying, this is my land. I am sovereign over the land, and I'm going to be the one that's going to be distributing this
Uh-huh.
land. And as
Uh-huh.
he has done it, let's say you fall upon hard times. Let's say you just don't have enough money to pay the bills. What could you do? And then what happens over time is, to pay debts, you have to increasingly sell things that you didn't want to
Yeah.
sell, but also you could sell your body, and that's where you would be indebted. So there's indentured servitude, right? Where now you have this, you owe your body to this other person, so you work for them as a slave.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and then you could even lose your land. Let's say your land gets seized, even.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What the year of Jubilee would do is they would delete all that. You would go back. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why, if you continue to read, the Lord makes provisions here to say, if as long as it's if as it gets closer to the year of Jubilee, that land, that the money that you get for the land will be less and less, because the year of Jubilee is coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're not going to pay $10,000 on year 2 and $10,000 in year 40, like 8. That's not going to happen. It's going to be less in year 48, because it's going to go back to the landowners.
So it depends on how far you are from the year of Jubilee. That's how much you pay in relation
Yeah.
to that. Okay.
Or how far you just had the year of Jubilee, right?
Right.
And
Yeah. Right.
so
Right. Right.
and so the great thing, I think, is, if you think about the years, 50 years is one generation, right?
Uh-huh.
And so in your lifetime, you will never have had a time where you were always poor. Well, in your lifetime, I should say, there was you will never be like always poor. There will always be a time, at least once, where you would go back to what God had designated and
Uh-huh.
allotted in your
Uh-huh.
land. So you could start over. So let's say, I don't know, maybe when you were 10, your land gets sold. And so you were a slave for 40 years. But during that time, you learned trade, you learned
Yeah.
skills. You weren't just sitting on your butt. And by the time you get your land back, given back to you, now you have all these skills and, um, you know, this know-how to perhaps even do agriculture, but you have your own land to do it in. And so you would see that this is an amazing thing, a provision, a grace that God gives his people. Now that I've said that, I do think that it is significant that on verse 10 it says it's done on the Day of Atonement.
Mm.
And so even the year of Jubilee, and I think it's significant that similar language that's used in Isaiah 61 is Jesus using that when he opens the scroll to Isaiah, right? And Luke,
Yeah.
this is about the ultimate debt cancellation, the ultimate debt absorption, I should even say.
Mm.
This is pointing to Jesus Christ, his work, what he's going to do for us, or what he has done for us. But back then, it's what Jesus was going to do for them. The year of Jubilee is a time where people would look forward to, where finally all their debts would be paid for,
Mm.
and they would be released from all of that. And so this is something that people could celebrate, looking forward to the ultimate year of
Yeah.
Jubilee, right?
So if I could just kind of summarize everything and maybe paint a broad picture, we know that the book of Leviticus, it's right after the Israelites are saved from bondage in Egypt, And as they are traversing through the wilderness, God gives his word to Moses and the laws and the customs and the traditions and the ceremonies that they are to hold as God's specific people, his chosen people. And this celebration of the year of Jubilee is one of those things. Now, for some of us, this may seem random, but as you just explained, this is not a random thing. As a matter of fact, this whole system or the year of Jubilee is to point to, like you said, in connection to the Day of Atonement, is to point to the great day of Jubilee that is coming, where the captives will be free. And we will be liberated. And this, of course, is pointing to Christ. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and also it's pointing to a lot of things, but ultimately points to Christ, but it also shows who is sovereign over God's people
Uh-huh.
and the land that
Right,
God's
right, right.
people are on. It's God who is sovereign. He's the one that gets to control it. He's the one that has to be able to, I mean, distribute as he pleases because it's him. There are these little nuances that you pick up, pieces of wisdom that I think that's why even after you listen to this, you can kind of study it. That's why the book of Ruth is so amazing, right?
Mhm.
So Naomi's return back, she didn't have any land. Why?
Yeah.
Because she was poor. Because she had to sell everything, and then she even left, right? She went to Moab. And if you remember the story, she comes back, and there's no one willing to buy that land back for her, right? Because what would happen is there would you would buy that land back for her, sure, but what would happen is you wouldn't actually own the land. There will be a time, and this would be pointing to the year of Jubilee, but it would also point to just the order of things that God has intended, where Naomi's heir would come, right,
Uh-huh.
through Ruth,
Uh-huh.
and it would belong to him. And that's why no one was willing to take, the person that was next in line wasn't willing to take up marrying Ruth and then raise up an heir only to give away that property that he
Right.
would have bought,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So he refused to do that, and then that's where he gave way to Boaz, and
Mm.
Boaz would be the next kinsman in line. So he was willing to do that, and because of that, we see this line go down all the way to David, and then all the way to Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example.
Yeah, so we see all these principles that take place, and as the people of God follow it, we see God's redemptive plan really come forth and shine through, blossom, flourish. His people flourish, right? And so I think it's a beautiful picture. And I think this is something that we should be taught, the year of Jubilee and what it ultimately pointed to.
So this is a structure that God has set for his people Israel during the time of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Um Curious though, some may think, just looking at this, isn't this kind of like communism? God is the government. God controls everything, which is true, and he does own everything. And it just seems like he just kind of, giving out allotments of land to whoever he pleases. And the commerce and the trading and the buying and selling of people doesn't really seem to matter. So isn't that kind of perhaps even going over and against capitalism, which is what we have here in the US?
So, in a sense, you could actually see it as a kind of communism.
Hmm.
I'll say why you can perhaps see it because wealth was partially redivided every few
Right,
years.
right.
And because of that, people might see it as some kind of communism. So, any kind of redistribution or redivision of wealth, people will see this as communism. But
Yeah.
it's inaccurate to call this communism, just as it is inaccurate to call, let's say, what the early apostles did in the early church, what the apostles did when they shared everything
Hmm. Hmm.
with what they had. They shared everything, and to call that communism is bad. So, what happens is in God's community, there is a true worship of God.
Hmm.
And communism does not allow for this, and we know this historically.
Right.
And I guess we go over it a lot, but it's good to review from time to time. When we fear God, we obey God's law, but we obey God's law in reverence for God, but also in thanksgiving to what God has done for us. So
Right,
our
right.
obedience comes from the knowledge that God has already saved us, you know, prior to our doing any good,
Mm.
right? And so God saw nothing really of worth in us. That's not why he saved us. He saved us because he loves us. And because of that, we now can in turn serve God. That's not the way communism works. And that's where you have this government telling you how to distribute according to what they believe is right, right?
Right, right, right.
This, I would believe, is more like a theocracy where the king, God, is telling you exactly how to distribute. That's a kingship rule,
Mm-hmm.
not a communist
Mm-hmm.
rule. And if I would add another extra political point in there, communism destroys the family. Communism has always broke down family and its sovereignty, the sovereignty of family units, because it needs to inject itself. The government needs to inject itself in every family matter so that they stay in line, that they're making sure that they are distributing as the government wants. And so you see this complete breakdown of family and its jurisdiction, what God has ordained for them to carry out, the authority and the responsibilities that the father and mother have are all abrogated to the government now through communism, because they need to control every single aspect of one's life to really have what they think is communist rule.
Mm.
And so that's not how the word of God works. It is through, and we saw it happen in Acts, it is through a profound sense of understanding that God has saved us. And because of that, I am willing to give up everything.
Right.
And remember, not all the apostles gave up everything. They all had their degree of what they gave up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Apostles meaning like people who follow Jesus. So we have Barnabas who gave everything, and that's why he was called Barnabas. But that means that other people didn't do everything,
Uh-huh.
right? Because Barnabas was a standout.
Right.
And
Right.
when Ananias and Sapphira came and tried to do what Barnabas did, but they held some back, Peter said, "No one forced you to do
Mm-hmm.
this."
Mm-hmm.
So that story gives us a picture that the church wasn't forcing people to give up everything,
Right.
and yet they did it out of their own free will, their own free volition, what they wanted to do out of their service to the Lord, in their dedication to Him.
So again, the year of Jubilee is a structure that God has set over his people. And it points to the atonement, right? So it's the forgiveness of debt, but we see here that it actually points to the fact that the forgiveness of debt isn't free. There is a price that is paid for it. And like you mentioned before, it points to Christ, and that's what it ultimately points to. I want to take a 2,000, 3,000 year jump to modern day today. And we have been talking a lot about debt forgiveness, the forgiving of debt, or perhaps we could even say it as the redeeming of debt in line with the year of Jubilee. How is this the same and how is this different? Forgiving student debt or student loans, does this have any correlation to the year of Jubilee? And is this something that as Christians we would support?
Yeah, I'll just say the simple answer first. The answer is absolutely not. It has nothing to do with the year of Jubilee.
Hmm.
The fact that people are correlating it with the year of Jubilee just means that they didn't understand any of the things, even
Right.
the simple things that we discussed here. And so why first of all, why student loans? Why not other loans? Why not business loans?
Hmm.
Why not other personal loans that people have taken to better their lives, right? Why specifically student loans when we know that 100% of people of age don't go to college? That's not true.
Uh huh.
There's a certain demographic that
Uh
goes to
huh.
college. So
Right.
why that demographic? And it's obviously political. And some people might be like, that's a great political move. That's a terrible political move. It's an evil political, whatever the case is. It is a political move
Hmm.
to, perhaps make the president's constituents or who he believes to be his constituents happier.
Yeah.
And so it has nothing to do with it. That's the simple one. Uh, I guess the longer answer could be, in addition to what I just said, the difference between student loan forgiveness and the year of Jubilee is that the year of Jubilee goes back to its original owners. Here, student debt forgiveness is not really forgiveness. So there's a misnomer. It's actually a redistribution of debt. So debt doesn't actually get canceled or forgiven. You redistribute the debt to other people. So let's say, you take advantage of this program,
Yeah.
and that means maybe like four per person, maybe about 4 or 5 people will be paying your debt through their taxes. So if you take the $10,000,
Hmm.
that means the person next to you will probably pay 2,000, up to about 5 people. So it is going to be about a 2,000 plus increase in taxes for this specific, you know, debt forgiveness program to come into effect. I was telling my wife this too. It's never it's never that clean with bureaucratic like spending.
Mm.
So let's say, um, if I split $10,000 from the people that will probably and most likely, apply for this debt forgiveness, and then I split it across all the taxpayers in the United States, how much would each person's taxes increase? And people have calculated it to be about 2,000 something, right? But even if that's the case, it's never that simple. You always have people in charge of this bureaucracy, in charge of the distribution, of collecting, of, making sure that this gets distributed properly, of getting these forms. Who's going to read the forms? Not a robot. A person's going to do it. Who's going to approve these forms? Not a robot. It's a person that's going to do it. So all these other people will have to do additional work for this debt forgiveness to come into effect. So it's, in my personal opinion, it's way higher than 2 grand or whatever it is. It's much, much higher.
Yeah.
And the precedent that this sets for the economy is much more worse too. I mean, I don't know if you were planning on getting into it, but if people have their student loans paid off for by the government, this really affects the economy, the economics of how colleges charge tuition to students. It absolutely does. And, I suppose we could get into it later, but knowing all of this, this is not just a misnomer to call it a debt forgiveness program. It is actually a lie. And I believe lies are evil. So this is an evil program.
So, going back to the connection between the year of Jubilee and student loan forgiveness, or I guess the lack of connection, some people might think, well, there's this narrative that for those that are going against student loan forgiveness, there's this narrative that, here was this 17, 18-year-old kid that just irresponsibly got a lot of student loans, and now that they can't pay it off, other people that perhaps couldn't even go to college because of the whole financial situation, other people are now paying off their debt. So, I mean, in connection to that, couldn't someone also look at the year of Jubilee and say, well, there could have been people that misused their funds and therefore they lost their land, and there are people that were good stewards of their financial gifts, and because of that, they were able to buy more land. Now, in the year of Jubilee, all of a sudden they have to give it all back to this person that was financially irresponsible. It seems, somewhat connected. How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah. So in this country, it's a little different, I would say, than at the time when people were living out the Levitical laws in Israel.
Yeah.
First of all, I would think that people would understand the difference between you having ownership of a land that you purposefully give away, and then you not having anything coming into debt first for
Ah, okay.
whatever reason.
Mhm.
And, I mean, I talk to people all the time, but we talk personally about this too. The level of education that you receive in undergrad is so vastly different
Yeah.
than, let's say, 100 years ago
Yeah.
that Thomas Witherell would have went through in just his education in undergrad. In undergrad, you would have learned Greek and Latin and Hebrew, and you would have learned like math up the wazoo. I don't know. People
Right.
are saying that graduate level educations now wouldn't compare to the undergrad
Mm,
level that people are learning now.
mm.
And so I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger scam that these undergrad institutions are trying to give you courses that are just plain junk and charge you money. And we are taking on this debt thinking this is free money. We're going to these colleges and universities. we're taking things like, I don't know, Rutgers 101. I don't know if they have that. I'm just giving you
Mhm.
an example. Rutgers 101, where you learn about the campus and you will get this is worth 2 credits. You paid for those 2 credits, right? You
Yeah.
paid money
Yeah.
for you to take a tour around campus that you could have done for free or just open up a book or pamphlet.
Right.
But you paid 2 credits, and credits are hundreds of dollars.
Yep.
One credit
Yep.
is hundreds of dollars. And so, and then you're like, oh yeah, easy A, it's good for my GPA or
Yep. Yep.
some nonsense like that. So yeah, people are getting into debt. People are getting into debt unnecessarily. But yeah, there is this scam it's increasingly looking like a scam. Are you learning Greek like they did? Are you learning Latin? Are you learning word origins and languages and the arts? If you're in liberal arts, I'm not saying liberal arts is bad. If you're
Mhm.
in liberal arts, are you learning the liberal arts? Are you reading Shakespeare? Are you understanding, people like Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, one of the greatest novelists, or, Jane Austen? Are you reading these people, or what are you doing? Are you taking some kind of theory courses on some new popular contemporary dance? Like, what is going on, right? And so, do we want to continue to do something like that? And then when you come out, let me tell you, even anecdotally speaking, for our church, people are coming out with these 4-year degrees and they're working in offices on spreadsheets,
Yep. Yeah.
data
Yeah.
input, data entry, software engineering, whatever it is,
Yeah.
things that you could learn in 6 months. So you paid up the wazoo a premium for 4 years for you to come out and eventually just do something that you could have done in 6 months
Yep.
on your own. That to me seems like a scam. Now you could go to a 4-year college and really have a great education. I'm not
Mhm.
saying this is 100% like that. So people are like, oh my goodness, he's being crazy. Not true. I'm just saying 100% of people don't need to go to college, especially if you're going to go to school to learn how to finger paint and that's your degree, right? If that's your
I
degree
don't think there's
on
a.
the art of finger painting, they're really, so I've been looking up
I don't
degrees.
think that's a
I've been
thing.
looking up PhDs. There really is someone who holds a PhD for snowboarding. And like the calm, like gives you or
It's
some
Sean
junk
White.
like that. Anyway, that to me is a scam.
Yeah.
And then you're teaching courses on snowboarding, right? And people are taking it in the graduate level. But anyway, and then so we're in a culture now that thinks, oh yeah, why not? Why not? Let's just really be educated. Yeah, I don't think we really need these institutions to pay millions of dollars or get paid millions of dollars to teach this. Why don't we teach the good stuff, right? And so, is that what we're learning? If I think you're going for a medical degree, I think it's absolutely important that you're educated, that you have, bio and chem, and then you have orgo
Orgo. Ugh.
like
It's the
down
worst.
packed, right? Obviously, you need that kind of education and training if you want to become a medical doctor. And so I'm not saying I'm against that, but if you're going to college just because you think you do, and then you have no idea what you're going to do, which is about 90+% of our generation,
Wow.
um, I think most people go into undergrad not knowing exactly what they're going to do,
That's true. That's
and
very true.
then that's terrible because you're
Yeah.
just wasting money.
Yeah.
If you know what you want to do and then you go do, which is for every other thing in life, you know what you want to do and then you put your money down.
Right.
You
Right.
don't put
Right.
your money down before you know what you want to do. Um, I can go off on maybe even, I know this is kind of a tangent, but
People are gonna
apparently,
think that you hate college.
yeah, it's not true. I love it, except I hate the scam for what it's becoming. Um, you could I was even telling my wife. So my wife's a public school teacher. She
Yeah.
had to get an education. I would even ask her if anybody. She would be a proponent of these education degrees. Like you have to get a master's in education to teach, let's say a fourth grader or a fifth grader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would say, did you really need to get a master's for it? Couldn't you have learned it in undergrad? Like, is this really a master's level like degree that you
Hmm.
need to teach kids in elementary school or Shakespeare for that matter
Hmm.
in high school? Do you really need a master's level degree. And then she said, probably not. Okay. Then I pushed the envelope. Do you really need a 4-year degree to teach kindergartners? Do you need to go to school for 4 years for you to teach kindergarten? And then, she said, probably not. So why in the world are we paying up the wazoo for these private institutions
Yeah.
to get an education degree for 4 years? That doesn't even count until you get your master's in many states, right? In Jersey, you need to get your master's, right? Where we are. And in New York, if you get your master's, that's when you get your real pay. So everybody needs to technically get their master's.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these things are taking place so that they could teach kids 2 + 2 = 4. Like, are you serious? It's like, what is it that you need this degree for? And so I'll give pushback, and I'll always welcome pushback. Like, come back and tell me what you think is good or bad. But because of all this, we're now in this culture that if we don't have this 4-year, degree, this piece of paper, which for a lot of times will amount to nothing in your future life, you have this huge debt. And because of that, the government believes that they can come in and solve this problem. I think the more important question now that I've said this is what are we doing to educate kids on true education?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you go to college, I want you to look forward to these things. These things are absolutely important that you learn this in college. Does anybody tell you that? Has anybody told you that when you went to college in your 4 years? Or did you just only hear from your peers, this is your time to live it up? It's your time to party. It's your time to make friends. These are the friends that you'll have for life, or something like that, something to that effect. And so you're so excited to go to college. Why? So that you can have the college experience. See, now that's what they call it. Not an education anymore. It's an experience.
Yep.
And so if that's the case, is it worth $60,000 a pop a year, right? For you to pay so that you can have an experience.
I feel like we're gonna have an uprising of kindergarten teachers.
Nah, yeah, send them to me. We'll have a nice discussion. If kindergarten teachers honestly believe that for them to be able to teach their alphabets, they needed 7 years of education, or 5 years of education, or 6 years, or whatever it is, and they needed to get into this kind of debt, and they really believe that, yeah, tell them. But I, from what I've experienced, no kindergarten teacher agrees with that. They all say this is stupid, but this is just something I have to do because that's part of the system.
So I guess building on the ridiculousness of getting that debt in the first place, what is so bad about forgiving that debt? And I wanted to read you a tweet that actually our producer Junsuk just sent me, because he's just all over the interweb. He just knows the ins and outs of the interweb.
Webs is plural.
Oh, it's web. There's more than one.
Yeah,
Like
it's
Mozilla,
webs.
Firefox, Safari. Those are the webs.
No, those
Oh.
are browsers, but it's fine.
Browsers.
It's fine. It's okay.
So the interwebs. What is the dark web?
That's another
Spider-Man
podcast
thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so Chunsuk sent me this from the interweb. This is Pastor Webs. This is Pastor John Pavlovitz, and this is what he tweeted. He said, "Conservative Christians are fully enraged at hashtag student loan forgiveness, missing the irony that their entire professed religion is based on the idea of a canceled debt. Way to lose the plot, kids." A little condescending at the end, but the whole point is, how can you as a Christian be mad about student loan forgiveness when your entire faith, or actually your salvation, is based on a canceled debt? So how would you connect that and say, you're wrong, sir?
It's difficult. It's difficult to, let's say, argue with someone whose premise is wrong. Definitions are off. So when someone gives you an argument and all their definitions are off and their premise is off, you always have to go back. But I
Mhm.
don't think they would be willing. So if I were to, let's say, have a debate with this person, it would be on those definitions and the
Mhm.
premise that he started with.
Mhm.
But to follow the premise and definition, try to respond, would be an impossible task because he's on a land of ridiculousness that he can't stand on.
Mm.
It's just what we in the Christian conservative camp might call sinking sands. But yeah. But to be serious now, I think where do we start from? Well, again, we could go back to debt forgiveness is a misnomer, it's a lie. You're not forgiving anyone's debts, you are redistributing the debts.
Okay.
That's not what God did either, right? So if you're saying Christ came to redistribute our sin, that would be kind of crazy
Well, what if
because
we say he redistributed to himself, like the debt? He
so
took
he
on the
ate
debt.
it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That would
yeah,
be awesome. It would be awesome if the government would be able to eat that debt themselves.
yeah.
But that's not how the government works. And
Right, right,
I
right.
think we've gone over this, but it's good. It's good review. Government makes no money. The government doesn't work. It doesn't produce. It doesn't supply. What it can do is kind of like help things along,
Uh-huh.
perhaps by
Yeah.
putting less regulation or more regulation to make
Mm,
things safer. So they could do things like that. But that will affect the economy. It will
right.
affect flow. It will affect supply and demand. So they do. I'm not saying they don't have an important role. They do. But if you're saying the government in itself is a producer, which makes money and then can make decisions to eat, let's say, the debt itself,
That's different.
that's false. All right.
Hmm.
It's patently false to say the
Right.
government can forgive a debt
Right, right,
because
right.
is it a debt owed to them? No, it's not. And even if it was owed to them, it really wouldn't be them doing it. Guess who gives money to the government? It's the taxpayer.
Mm,
So the taxpayer gives money to the government so that they can have these programs that they can, you know, supply law enforcement to help with safety, and things of that nature. But if you're saying that, the government forgiving debts is like Jesus forgiving debts, that's a crazy comparison, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
The government is not Jesus. And this is where I would say this person has a misunderstanding of worldview.
Mm,
The government cannot forgive
mm,
debts. And when the government says in a lie that they are forgiving student debt, first of all, we could go back to the beginning. Why student debt? Why not any other debt? Why is student loans a priority? I'll tell you why it's a priority because it's politically a priority for this party and its politicians. But that's why they did it. And you can say this was a great political move, this is a bad political move, but it's definitely a political move. This is not an altruistic thing that the government is doing to say that they're quote unquote forgiving debts. So that's not really happening, okay? And for this person to think that means, perhaps he is the one that is mistaken, doesn't know not just economics, but he doesn't know the Bible. Again, the government cannot forgive debts that are not owed to itself. And even if it was owed to itself, we would have a debate on who the government really is, whose money the government really is using then. Isn't it the taxpayers' money, right? And this, oh no, we're not going to use the taxpayers' money. We're going to just, alleviate it through bonds. And
mm,
who's paying that interest? Guess who's paying that interest for the bonds that they're selling? The taxpayer.
right.
Oh, we're just going to print more money. If we print more currency, we can pay for these programs. Guess who's going to suffer because they're, in a sense, paying for you printing out extra currency? The people in this country.
Right.
So no matter what the government does, it's the taxpayer, it's the person in the country that will feel the effects of their programs, of their decisions. And so, if this person really wants someone really suffering from student debt that made a terrible mistake, like you said, when they were 17, they took on this debt that they didn't know, would not help them in any way. They got a degree in, I don't know, you can make something up in podcast recording. And what they did was they realized that they could have read a book in 6 hours about
Yeah.
podcast recording and done it themselves instead of paying $60,000 a year in tuition
Mm,
in this elite private university. And now they owe like $500,000 or whatever it is, right? If that's the case, then I would say you help this poor guy. You help this guy.
mm,
If you're a minister, help this person learn to pay debts back. and help this person to understand what debt is. That we are not to take debts on willy nilly, nonchalantly. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be a culture. We shouldn't have, I don't care if the culture today says we can take on debt like anytime we want, just swipe it, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I don't care if that's our culture. It shouldn't be the Christian person's culture. It shouldn't be the church's culture to do so because that's directly going against what God warns us about, right?
You know what I realized? Even that phrase, swipe it, has become outdated. We don't swipe anymore. We tap or we plug in, I guess, the credit card. We don't swipe anymore. Weird.
Well, there's three ways that you could tap. I like tapping because
It's
you don't
easy.
actually have to insert or,
Yeah.
but whatever. I mean, the RFID chips are not always safe too.
What chips? What chips?
It's okay.
Um. Okay. Well, responding to that, what if someone were to say for Christians that are against this loan forgiveness, right? Because, like you said, it is going to the taxpayer. The government isn't forgiving anything. The taxpayer is just paying for it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't force someone to do that.
Right.
That's communism, and that is going against. So you can't forcibly take property from other people. So this is where I believe maybe you hit upon something that really is disturbing. We believe that we have this right to infringe upon other people's property.
Uh-huh.
So if I think that there's nothing wrong with the government taxing other people who had nothing to do with my debt, an extra $2,000+,
Uh-huh.
then it's the same thing as saying I believe there's nothing wrong with the government going into your house and taking $2,000 worth of your property and just exiting
That's what they're
from your
doing
property
anyway.
because
Yeah.
that's exactly what it
Right.
is.
Right.
That's crazy if you think about it like that. Imagine a government official coming into your house and saying, "Hey, this sofa is worth $2,000. You owe $2,000 to the government. You could pay me. Oh, you don't have? I'm going to take your sofa so that you can help pay for this poor guy's,
Yeah.
finger painting degree, whatever it is, right?" If that's the case,
Yeah.
how ridiculous. It's the more you think about it, I hope that people will see how ridiculous this is to think that it's okay for the government to tax us more,
Mm.
especially on stupid things. I get it. If we need security, let's say, we have an imminent threat of danger in our country, so we need to increase our defense budget by billions of dollars. And then so we need to increase our taxes by $1,000. I get it that, our country, like our countrymen will be like, yeah, well, we'll chip in $1,000 each. And then we'll make sure that we have enough defense because what is $1,000 compared to no house,
Right.
or
Right.
no life,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I get that there are very important things that need to be done by the government, and then that's exactly what Romans 13 says. Romans 13 says this: the government is a servant of God,
Mm.
and that word "servant" is the word diakonos, which means deacon. So the government is God's deacon, and so to think about it like that is very important for us. But if deacon of God is now frivolously and irresponsibly handling his or her duties, what would you do? You would speak out against it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what the Christian ought to do. Unlike this person who tweeted what they tweeted, if you believe something is innately wrong, morally wrong, just economically wrong, just everything's so wrong about this,
Mm.
you would say something. And that's exactly what this is.
All right. So, listening to the Dear Church podcast, let's just say this person said, wow, you got me. But, it's true that taxpayers are paying for it, and there's no such thing as government forgiveness because the government is not forgiving anything. But what about Ephesians 4:32, where Christians are commanded to be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you? So, with that verse in mind, what is so wrong about paying for someone else's debt? Isn't that what we're called to do as Christians, to forgive one another?
Yeah, I think we should. I absolutely agree that we should forgive one another. When someone wrongs us, we should forgive them. But we should tell them that they're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
think that's something that maybe a lot of us are missing.
Mm.
If you come and let's say you slap Chunseok in the face
I
for
would.
no reason, right? He didn't deserve it. You just slap him right in the face. You slap him right across his face turns red, and then I'm able to witness it. People are gonna think you actually did that, right? And then I go to Junseok. It's your responsibility to forgive Sam now.
Uh-huh.
And I don't say anything to you. There's
Yeah.
something wrong with my counsel. Is
Uh-huh.
there not?
Right, yes.
Right. So immediately this does assume, and it rightly assumes, that if you slap someone in the face for no reason, you would be in wrong. You
Uh-huh.
would get disciplined. You
Uh-huh.
would find that disorder spoken out against.
Mm.
And then the person that you wronged, if they are a brother in Christ, we would tell them this person has asked for your forgiveness. You need to forgive him.
Mm.
And then if Chunseok didn't, then he would be now in line for discipline
Yeah.
because he's not obeying the laws of God. I wish people would get that full picture then, right?
Yeah.
Like, stop thinking that people can just go around slapping each other whenever they want, and the person that gets slapped has to just forgive them without us telling them, hey, the person who's slapping is wrong, right?
Mm.
The person who is stealing from you is wrong.
Mm.
The government cannot come in and take whatever they want, whenever they want, and us, we don't have to just sit there and take it. That's not what it is,
Yeah.
right? If the government comes and takes and it starts to affect even how we worship, what are you going to do then? Let's say you really believe in this communist kind of theory and you believe in all its tenets that we should forgive first and then forget about the wrongdoer.
Uh-huh.
First of all, it's not the brotherhood, right? And Ephesians is talking about the brotherhood. But even outside, you want to extend it there. I get it. Even if we went with that faulty logic and went with what that person was saying, then will you come and you'll be like, yeah, please take what you want from this house of worship so that we can't even worship anymore. Who needs worship, right? That's what you'll go to eventually. What are these sacred objects? There's no such thing as sacred objects here. What is communion? We don't need communion. What's bread? We don't need bread. Take everything. Like, is that what anybody would do? I don't think people would do that. There is a limit. What's that limit? Why'd you set that limit? By what standard did you set that limit? And those are the questions we would ask. And if you go all the way back, we would say the standard should be set by God.
Yep.
And the standard is set by God. So let's read his word, understand it well, and then make these comments so that we don't sound so foolish when we're in that progressive camp.
What if? I know I'm giving you a lot of what ifs here. What if we think about financial aid, scholarships, FAFSA? FAFSA was my best friend in college. FAFSA. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Yeah, I had to look that one up. But FAFSA, right? Or even the rent relief programs during COVID, right? These programs, they're all paid by somebody. They're federal. For scholarships, it's paid by either like an alumni or some organization, or, if it's federal, it's paid by the taxpayer. And so if there is no such thing as a free lunch, which you said a couple weeks ago, I believe, in a sermon, there's no such thing as a free lunch because there isn't, then how come these forms of quote unquote paying for somebody are okay versus student debt forgiveness? Isn't it really just kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I would say they're completely different for many reasons, but let me give you just some very simple ones because, again, this is a Christian worldview podcast.
Right.
It does mean that you need to know economics, but these are some things that perhaps people can disagree on, the economic portion, but it needs to come down from the basic principles of
Right.
God's word. Otherwise, I don't even think you have economics. You have something crazy, which will not last. But let's say you take out a loan and it's, help paid for by the government, meaning the government gives you this loan and then you pay it back with a very small interest.
Yep.
And so at that beginning, you would be able to understand that the government is giving you this cash and that's taxpayer money, but you are going to pay that back.
Uh-huh.
That's it.
Okay.
Right. There are some grant programs that the government houses that people receive because they are exceptional and they just don't have the means to pay.
Uh-huh.
And so there are programs in place to help these people finish their degrees because perhaps they'll be what the government would believe, or the people of the government, because the people make the government, would believe that they will be beneficial to society. So why don't we help them along? Why don't we give a little extra of our tax funds
I see.
to
Okay.
help those people along?
Right. Okay.
They're completely different than debt forgiveness. I hope that you would see where all these programs stem from, whether you agree with it or not, whether
Mm.
you're 50% for it, 100% for it, or 0% for these programs, you'll see that they're not at all comparable to the quote unquote debt forgiveness
Mm.
program. These are debts that people have incurred with the knowledge that they will have to pay it back.
Yes.
That's
Yes. Yes. Yes.
completely different. When you sign on to those debts, you're saying and you're vowing that you will pay these debts back. And all
Mm.
of a sudden, the government is saying, actually, I'll pay them back. Why would you expect that, want that, or believe that you're entitled to that?
Yeah.
You shouldn't. And so I think they're completely different. And I get why people want to conflate the two to be equal because, if we help someone across the street, then we will conflate, yeah, we should also pay for their rent. I don't know. It's like,
Yeah.
I think they're two different things. Like, no, no, no. You help that person down the street. You owe them everything now. Otherwise, why even help them down the street? Why don't you just let them get run over by a car? Well, it's like, no, I do not think you understand the basic principles of economics or life for that matter. That's
Mm.
why these like pro-abortionists are like, well, if you help them out of the, if you want to make sure that they don't die in the womb or no, they don't get killed in the womb, you better help them throughout the rest of their life.
Mm.
We're like, yeah, sure. That means pay their rent. It's like, no, I don't think so. I don't think
Mm.
so. So even in the Bible, it does give you basic principles. Like even the poor, they were supposed to be helped, right? We're supposed to help the poor. But what is commanded of the poor? What is given to the poor? It's not just sit on your butts and beg, or just sit on your butts and expect a check. There were these gleaning programs in
Mm.
effect, right? You can
Yeah.
go in and glean. That means
Yep.
even the
Yep.
poor worked and the rich knew that everything wasn't there. So that one escapes even the conservatives and liberals today. Okay, I get that. It doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter what political party that you're affiliated with. The rich has to understand everything doesn't belong to them, and then some of them they should leave for the poor to glean off of, right? And the poor needs to understand that it's not owed to them. You don't deserve this money. You have to work for it.
Mm.
And even that work is grace.
Mm.
So the fact that you could work for it is grace because you weren't owed anything. And the rich people need to understand that your riches are given to you by God. And so you need to do what's right by God, not by what you think.
Right.
Remember, communism takes God out of it and government becomes, the big daddy, right?
Mm.
And so that's why communism is so evil. And so we need to understand that. I hope that was an okay answer about financial aid and
No, that's
scholarships.
helpful. But I mean, what about like stuff like rent relief during COVID or the stimulus check?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to you briefly about the PPP and
Yeah.
um
What is the
the
PPP, by the way?
what is it? Paycheck, payroll, something like that. It's
The Paycheck Protection Program.
paycheck. Yeah. So paycheck protection program, the PPP loans were for your employees.
Yeah.
So what happened was COVID hit. No one knew what was going on. So the government came out and said 15 days to slow the spread. I don't know if you still remember it. 15 days, we're
Yes.
going to shut down everything so that we slow the spread. Now, that was a big failure on their part. The government failed big time because the government doesn't know anything about when it comes to a new epidemic. And I get it, right? No government really knew what to do, but they failed. That failure has cost us, though. So even though it's understandable that they failed, the failure does come with a cost. And so the PPP loans were implemented to help businesses not completely go under or employees still have the ability to pay their paychecks to their employers, rather,
Mm.
would have the abilities to pay paychecks to their employees so that, your workers need this paycheck to go home and feed their family.
Mm.
If you don't have anything coming in because the government shut down everything, how are you going to pay that? So because it's the government's responsibility, they're the ones that shut down everything. They offered a PPP program. Again, not because they have money, but again, it's through their programs of them getting eventual tax dollars, which will raise inflation, which is why we're seeing things like what we're seeing now. But This is a program that they implemented so that people in the immediate aftermath of the shutdowns will not go hungry and die of
Yeah.
starvation and things
Yeah.
like that, or get kicked out of their homes. So this is a government-induced, government-responsible event that happened. And so to alleviate that pain, they came up with certain programs. So the government is the one that produced the problem, and the government is the one that tries to solve the problem as well, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, you might be thinking, a skeptic will be thinking, what could have gone wrong? Obviously. But there is a difference between that
Mm.
and
Loan
student debt
forgiveness.
loan
Yeah.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's completely different. Again,
Yeah.
we're talking at the other ends of the ocean here. We're
Mm.
talking completely different countries. We're talking as far as the East is from the West.
Oh.
Those are different concepts, okay? They're not the same, is my point. And even if I speak in hyperbole, I hope people understand this is hyperbole. Obviously, it's not as far as the East and as from the West. That's how far our sins are forgiven
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
taken
yeah.
away from us.
That's a good verse.
But yeah, this loan forgiveness program is
Uh-huh.
different from PPP loans
And stimmies.
and stimulus packages, yes. And I mean, I could tell you why I didn't like them, but we'll see the aftermath of us getting, $1,200 or whatever in the check. Our grandchildren are going to be affected.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to bring these up just in case these are things that people may be thinking of, like these government funded programs or relief funds that, are mentioned. And I just wanted to just kind of compare them to the student loan forgiveness thing that we are witnessing now.
Yeah, I think some people may have questions about that. So, yeah, I think that's a good question.
But we're gonna move on from this topic. But if you have any other questions regarding the student loan forgiveness, or and even more of how Christians are to view this program or this idea, um, please don't fret to contact us at podcasts@cjsnj.org. I want to quickly move to a Q&A, and there is a jingle coming. I know, I know for a fact. One of our producers, we signed him. One of our producers has something in the lab, so in the kitchen, as they say, in that world. So we'll have that out soon.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
So this question comes to us from the interwebs. And this question reads, I was wondering why we strive for certain biblical values to be put into legislation, but not others. For example, we ban drugs or stealing, but I don't see anyone trying to make lying or divorce on unbiblical grounds illegal. Is it just a practical thing or what?
Yeah, divorce, people say the breakdown of the family really came from when we started to put in no fault divorce.
Yep.
And so there is something to that. I suppose a younger person might not even remember a time when there was or knew the difference between fault divorce and no fault divorce. You couldn't get a divorce for any for like a reason like my wife's cooking is bad or something like that.
That's rough.
Yeah, now people can get a divorce for irreconcilable differences or something like that.
Yeah.
That could be my wife's cooking is bad. And so we've gone to this extreme where it's bad. So we can say divorce is not only unbiblical, but it is terrible for our society. It's ruining our families, it's ruining our communities, our culture is affected. What are we celebrating now? We're not celebrating marriages and families and fathers and mothers anymore. We're just celebrating pleasure or sex or whatever it is.
Mm.
And anything that is not family, we get to celebrate, right? And so, yeah, it's a terrible thing. And lying is illegal.
Well, I guess, and Chunsa kind of messaged us just now because he's a great producer and he catches everything. He said lying under oath is literally illegal.
He said it with the H, literally.
So I know that it is illegal, but just lying, like
Yeah. So you can't lie.
yeah,
You can't lie and be like, well, I didn't do anything illegal. So if you're
Right.
giving like testimony, you can't give false testimony. That is also going to give you big time in jail.
Well,
And lying
yeah.
under oath would make you commit perjury, which is an offense will land you in jail. And so those are things that we still have in the laws. I believe, though, the spirit of the question is why do we put certain biblical values? It seems as though we prioritize certain
Oh,
biblical
yeah.
values over others.
Yes.
So we're not going to go like put someone in jail for a white lie,
Right.
Like, did you really brush your teeth? No, you didn't, and
Yeah.
you're going to go to jail, that kind of thing.
That's
And
disgusting.
so, yeah.
I did,
Anyway,
though. I did brush my teeth yesterday and today.
you brushed your teeth today in
In
the morning?
Yeah.
Not after you ate, though. I heard you're supposed to do it after you eat.
That's like a legend. Everyone says that.
My dentist just told me that.
Yeah, they
I
always
should
they
floss
have to
after I
say that
eat.
kind of stuff.
Anyway, going back to that, though, it's really interesting.
The teeth?
No, the flossing thing.
Oh, that's real.
There are people that floss after every meal then, huh? If
Um,
you're a flosser after every meal, could you email us a podcast that
I
you
am a
just enjoy
flosser.
after every meal?
Not every meal, but flossing is real.
I floss every day,
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
but to my dentist, that was not enough. She's like, "What? No." It's like, "Well, you're supposed to do it after every meal." I was like, "Well, I didn't know that." So if I eat
That's
like
a lot
a
of
steak or
floss.
something, I'll floss right then and there.
Yep.
But otherwise, I'll just floss at the end of the day.
Yeah,
But
same.
apparently, that's not good enough. So
Yeah.
maybe some people are disgusted by this. You guys are savages.
Yeah, I don't know. Flossing after every meal is you have too much time. I don't have the time or the luxury.
Yeah. Anyway, I think the spirit is, why do we prioritize certain biblical values over others? And so,
Yes.
like, why do we prioritize being pro-life over, let's say, making sure that, I don't know, what's another one that's pretty serious that we don't maybe prioritize as much?
Blasphemy.
Yeah, like saying like the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah.
Yeah, how come we don't prioritize that when that is an offense that is subject to
That's a
harsh
bad one.
punishment, death?
Yeah, that's terrible.
And so, why do we do that? I think that's a good question. Why do we take one over the other? And I think it comes down to what is precious, what is actionable, and what is outward that we can measure. And those are all these things that are taken into account.
Mm.
So even in the church, when we discipline someone, we don't discipline someone for their private thoughts, even though you can sin in your private thoughts.
Yeah.
We're not like, Sam, you thought a dirty thought, I'm going to discipline you. There's no way I would know. But once you say a dirty thought and it comes out of your mouth,
Uh-huh.
that's outward, unrepentant sin. If you say it and then you don't say, I'm sorry, it's like, nope, I don't take anything back.
Right.
And then that's an outward, unrepentant sin that is disciplinable by the church.
Mm.
And I think that's similar because the jurisdictions of the church and the government are similar in the sense that they can discipline. The sword is given to the government, though, so the church does not kill people, which in medieval times they did not understand. So the church was busy killing people that they thought they were heretics and things like that. But yeah, that being said, I think you got to take all those things into account. But there are things that are immediate and dire. For instance, if someone was not brushing their teeth and you thought that after not brushing their teeth would rot and fall out. So you're like, this is very important that you brush your teeth and you clean your teeth every day.
Yes.
I think that should be a rule in this household.
Uh-huh.
And then you're like, okay. Versus, when a car is coming straight at you at 90 miles per hour, you should not jump in front of it.
Yep.
I think that's a good rule too. And you might agree, I think. But I would think one is much more urgent when that time comes, right? When you're facing that, right?
Mm.
So if a car is coming at you at 90 miles per hour and someone's not brushing their teeth and I have a chance to save one person, who would I save? Like that. So in that sense, I hope that people can see some of the things that we want to implement as law is because a life is immediately at risk. And that's pro-life right there. A life is immediately at risk right now, this very moment. Every second that a law is in place where we can take a kid's life, anytime we want, a kid's life is possibly being taken.
Mm.
That is a terrible, terrible thing. And so we want to stand against that. We
Yeah.
want to show people this is actually against God's law, order. Any kind of prosperity you want in this life will be taken away, not only because this is not going along with the order that God has planned, but because wrath comes.
Mm.
Wrath will come when you don't follow the order. And so this is just wrath. And if you don't follow the order, that's just what happens. It's the thing like complaining about, like, if you throw a ball into the air, why it's coming down. Why doesn't it just stay up in the air? Because that's the law of gravity. That's the law of nature. This is how God has designed the world. You keep on taking lives, God will come and he will destroy this land. And that's the way it is. And that's why we continue to warn. We continue to show people it's good not to kill babies. And then we come in with all these like what if questions, like what if this 10-year-old, this happened, that happened. We talked about it in our previous podcast.
Yep.
All these anecdotal extreme cases. Why? Because we don't want the principle to be true.
Mm.
The principle is true. Come with as much extreme cases as you can. The principle will still hold true. Okay. And so I think that's why we strive for certain legislation over others, because of the immediacy of the danger and the effects that it will have on society.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we will be talking about feminism. What is that? What is the difference between first wave, second wave, 90th wave, and how are we to view feminism and the ways we see it in our culture today as Christians? Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.